all across America and around the world. This is Veterans Radio. This is Veterans Radio.
Good day. I'm Jim Fausone. I'm the officer of the deck today here on Veterans Radio, and thanks for joining us. We've got some interesting stories for you. We always want to remind you you can find more about Veterans Radio at its Facebook site or at the web, veteransradio.org, where we're on the web 24/7. You can find a lot of our podcasts there as well. We post new ones every Tuesday, so you can get a new story, a new interview, something you didn't know before by going to veteransradio.org. And before we get started, we want to thank our sponsors. First up, we want to thank National Veteran Business Development Council, nvbdc.org. It was established to certify both service-disabled and veteran-owned businesses. You'll find out how they can help your business by going to nvbdc.org. We want to thank Legal Help for Veterans. Legal Help for Veterans fights for veterans' disability rights all across the nation. You can reach them at 800-693-4800 or on the web at legalhelpforveterans.com. We just want to remind you that Veterans Radio podcasts are available on all your favorite streaming platforms, including rss.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Rees Across America Radio. So wherever you are, you can find us, whether it's on your mobile phone or your computer or your laptop, your tablet. But listen in to Veterans Radio Podcasts. We post something new every week, and you're going to find it informative.
We want to welcome back to Veterans Radio Colonel Michelle Ruehl, Air Force veteran. Michelle, welcome back.
Thank you.
Well, we're glad to have you. We'll talk more about your military career at the end because it is kind of fascinating. But you're involved in a nonprofit called StableStrides, and folks can learn more about it by going to StableStrides.org. It's involved in equine therapy. Yes. So, Michelle, you've been involved in this since you were a cadet at the Air Force Academy. So a few years ago, we might say.
Couple decades.
Tell us how you got involved and what equine therapy is.
It actually goes back prior to my military history. When I was growing up in Detroit, I used to go up north in Michigan to a horse camp. And at that horse camp, it was run by a church. They did a few different programs that could help teens that had gone through transition or troubling times. And I used to volunteer to help feed and muck out stalls and lead the horses. And I thought, well, that's interesting how a horse interacts with someone who's going through some mental health and challenges. But I'll never see that again. And then it turns out I went out to the Air Force Academy in Colorado, and in our very limited time, we were allowed to go do volunteer projects. And I heard of an equine therapy center, which used to be called Acts 1911, which addresses doing miracles for a community. At that time, it was called Pikes Peak Therapeutic Riding Center, and I had to borrow an upperclassman's car at the Air Force Academy. I would drive 40 minutes out, and I just, again, volunteered to be a horse leader and what's called a sidewalker. A sidewalker is someone who helps someone who's in a wheelchair mount onto a horse, and you hold on to the lower half so that they can feel riding and what walking feels like. But it takes a sidewalker on either side. And there's an accreditation body called PATH, and that's Professional Association of Therapeutic Horsemanship International. It's an accreditation body that does certifications. So I thought, well, I'll get a couple certifications, but I probably won't see this again. As it turned out, every military base that I was stationed at as a pilot, within 20 minutes, there was an equine therapy center. But over the last 2 decades, it wasn't well known and there wasn't a lot of evidence-based research. It just seemed sort of an alternative therapy that might be for some people, but not for others. But I always found a place. For instance, when I was stationed at Beale flying the MC-12, there was a therapy center about 20 minutes outside the South Gate, and I was able to work with them called Warrior Soul. When I was in Virginia, of course, that has a lot of horse history, but I was able to find a therapy center, also Little Rock, Arkansas, and then, of course, Colorado. So I kept up my certifications thinking I would do it part-time, and I did for a while. I'm a therapeutic riding instructor, so I can help people who have different types of disabilities, whether that's speech, occupational, physical therapy. It's called hippotherapy on a horse. And then I also started digging into other types of work with horses, including mental health. So I also have a certification, Equine Specialist in Mental Health and Learning. Long title, we shorten it to ES for Equine Specialist. And I combined that with I'm now a life coach that helps veterans and military members deal with addiction, recovery, grief, and suicidal ideations. And the reason I started moving towards mental health with horses is I was noticing at every single base, there would be people coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan who didn't want to do traditional talk therapy, but they were willing to go out and work with animals. And I thought, well, I'll just sort of stay involved peripherally. Well, after my 21-year military career, I recently retired, and I was doing some part-time work with now called StableStrides. It's under its third name change. And I was just doing Mondays and Tuesdays, and I was working with some children, and I started noticing that we didn't have the same veteran and military population that we'd had over the last 2 decades. And so I joined the board. I joined the board of StableStrides. And I thought, well, that might be a way to help. I was recently elected to a school board. I'm on another board at Mount Carmel Veterans Service Center. So I thought from the executive level, I can help expand our services back to serving the 330,000 veterans we have in Colorado, 7% of our state. But we also have 30,000 active duty and reserve military members here from all over the country. And I get more phone calls a day requesting these services, which we can get into in a minute. But the point is the demand is high and people are looking for this type of therapeutic environment as they're coming back with moral injury and PTS. After I was on the board for a little bit, the previous executive director resigned with some family issues. And so we looked around the room going, where are we going to find an immediate executive director who can work with veterans and military, who can start now and can expand our program? And I thought, well, that's hard to find. Turns out.
You learned nothing in the Air Force, you volunteered. So, come on, you should have known better what this was going to get you into.
I do. So now I am the executive director of StableStrides.
Talk a little bit about, because there is now more research and we're learning more, maybe it's just getting more exposure to equine therapy. What is it between a horse and a person who's having their own challenges that sort of is a connection that makes this work for some folks?
Yeah, I can put it in a nutshell that our, ancestors used horses quite a bit because they knew something that we have sort of forgotten in our kind of modern Western medicine. And that's that a horse, it mirrors human behavior. But what a horse can't do that humans are very good at doing is they can't hide their true feelings or anxiety. So they're part of a herd. And horses just want to know all the time, am I safe? So they turn to humans as part of their herd as long as they feel safe. But when they don't feel safe, they act out. So they may show anxiety, which we can see in their ears and in their body, in their behavior, their breathing. But horses also have the mentality of about a 4 to 7-year-old child, and they can sense our heartbeat, human anxiety, and our behavior at up to 4 to 5 feet away. So what a horse offers for you is a mirror to what you're trying to hold in and compartmentalize. And you may not want to sit on a couch and do traditional talk therapy. So what we do with equine therapy is we'll have a client work with a horse and with a specialist. And then we ask the horse and the client to sort of lead this session. And it's not that there's no objective. There's a very clear objective. But I'll give an actually concrete example. I worked with a gentleman from Fort Carson who was a sergeant who was really struggling with anger management and with domestic abuse. And he knew that he was being violent towards his spouse. But he couldn't quite put a finger on when it was coming up. He would come home and feel like he was calm and he could handle being with his spouse, but something would trigger him after a couple of tours in Iraq. So I chose a horse for him that did have high anxiety. It was very high spirited, but it was kind. And all I said was, hey, go grab that horse. Go try to go bridle that horse and bring it to you. And the horse would back away and wouldn't get anywhere near him. And this guy had horse experience. And he kept saying, I don't understand why I've ridden. I know how to do this. How come he won't come near me? I didn't have to say much because I watched as he tried to do some deep breathing and calm himself down. The horse would approach. And as soon as he would start to walk towards the horse again, the horse would back up. And immediately he looked at me and he said, I didn't realize I was giving off this much anger or anxiety. And he said, is this how my wife feels?
Wow, that's powerful.
he came to that conclusion and realized he was putting out this anxiety, but the horse can't hide it. Like, we wear a mask, we hide behind, I'm fine, I can handle it. Well, they don't do that because everything's a predator. So they have to communicate in a herd to say danger. And so they give us a mirror to our own challenges and our own mental health struggles, which even I have participated in. And I'd be happy to share how it helped me as well.
Well, we'll come back to that for a moment, but I think this is one of these things, and we've been talking to veterans on Veterans Radio for 20 plus years now. There's no one silver magic bullet that deals with the problems veterans may have on emotional or anger or PTSD. So you have to find the therapy or the approach that the veteran's comfortable with. And I think at the VA for a long time, they just gave you, take these pills, that's it, one size fits all. But that's where equine therapy comes in. For some folks, this may be the right therapy that works for them, that they can connect with while they didn't connect with a variety of other things. And is that kind of what you see as well?
I am seeing it's just another mode. It's another tool in the kit, but for the type of person that is generally drawn towards the military and towards operation and towards relationship and towards being a protector. All of those come out when you're working with a 2,000-pound animal that might be bigger than you, because there's that instinct for us as humans to protect as the animal's part of our herd, part of our squadron, part of our battalion. But at the same time, that animal is also looking to us to provide something and clearly communicate. If you try to hide or lie to the animal, it knows, and it won't come towards you, and it won't build that relationship. So it's just a different modality, and it doesn't include Western medicine, which you could augment if your doctor says that that's correct. But this is more, how do I work through some of that energy, some of the triggers, some of the PTS, and even grief. Horses are animals that grieve when one is removed or one passes away or when they're separated. They stand and they look for the other. They'll stand in the spot that they were. They'll eat in the same trough and just look for their member. So they really understand that group mentality when a group is sort of separated. And it's just a modality that works for a lot of people that are already drawn to a military lifestyle. But it doesn't require sitting still. You don't have to sit down and talk about your feelings. You can act them out. You can ride, you can touch, you can actually express emotion. And it doesn't even require talking for a lot of this.
And we're talking to Air Force retired Col Michelle Ruehl, who's the CEO of StableStrides.org in Colorado, about equine therapy. These animals are, as you mentioned a minute ago, big, sizable. Their care is costly. I know from reviewing StableStrides.org's website, it has an operating budget of about $1 million for, I'm not sure how many horses, I think there's 10 or 12 or something, but this is an expensive proposition for a nonprofit. How do you keep it going financially? There's a positive outcome for people, but still it takes a lot of resources to do that.
It does. This is one of the most expensive nonprofits. It's a large animal that eats and then has vet bills, and they eat a lot. We have it down to grants and donor funding, but to be honest, if every time the horse comes out of the stall, it's about $200 for just coming out. That's overhead operating costs of running a farm and a ranch. We do have 15 horses, but 3 of those are mini. Mini horses are about the size of my Great Pyrenees or smaller. Even those have therapeutic value, having a small horse to work with, and children love it as well. So what we've been really dependent on over the last 2 decades, they've actually been around for 44 years, but for the last 2 decades specifically, has been a lot of VA funding, adaptive sports. There's been all sorts of private donors, but as you know, there's donor fatigue. There's also a focus over the last year that's been on food scarcity, and rightly so. But the mental health of my generation of veterans that are coming home from 20 years of war in Afghanistan and in Iraq, what we don't want is what happened in Vietnam, where we weren't prepared for the mental health challenges of our veterans coming home. Now we know better. So how do we do better? And part of that is this type of therapeutic work is helping for moral injury and grief as well. I mean, my generation, I was working in the White House the night Afghanistan fell. And I have many people coming to me going, I still have my interpreter in Afghanistan. I'm feeling all of this sort of grief and I can't get them out. And so we actually have horses that help process some of that grief and also loss from the war. But if we want to do better, it means having about 12 to 15 horse capacity to be able to do the services. And each horse is about $10,000 a year. So we look for corporate sponsors. We're always looking for someone to sponsor an entire horse for 10 or a partial horse and help with those payments. And honestly, I don't take a paycheck as the executive director. Right now, I feel like my heart is in giving that back so that we can give scholarships to our military. But the other thing that we're really struggling with is the cost of having a therapist that accepts TRICARE. So for our active duty members here, we have 7 military bases right here in Colorado, 5 within driving distance from my equine center. And so I get calls every morning from the military bases saying, can you take someone? And right now we can only accept, we have one therapist who takes TRICARE for children, which is very important, taking care of our military members' children who are experiencing secondary effects of their parents' trauma and PTS. But then also, we used to have therapists who could accept TRICARE, but as you can imagine, a nonprofit that has to feed horses and keep the lights on a ranch, we don't have the same funding opportunities to be able to fully pay for a therapist that's in private practice. So this has to be someone who we can pay through grants and donor funding, but they also love working with our military veteran population. They choose to do it. They choose to do it through a nonprofit. So we also are looking for people that might be listening to this. They go, I could do that for 4 hours on a Friday. And then we're looking for those donors to help supplement the cost. It costs about $200 per session to pay out of pocket. And we know that for a lot of our military members, that's just, it's a high cost, but the return on investment is life-saving.
Well, and I want to suggest to our veteran radio listeners, if you're an individual or a corporation or a foundation, you know, somebody who might be thinking that they could support equine therapy, go to StableStrides.org. You can see their tax information. There's a lot of financial transparency there, which I was glad to see. I'm sure they can reach out to you, Michelle, as the executive director there. But let's find ways to keep these kinds of programs available at a cost or a reasonable cost or no cost to our veterans and their families. I love the fact that you're helping children of veterans as well, because they so often get left out of the deal, right? Maybe mom or dad can go to the VA for care, but you know there's no care for the kid, and they do suffer silently often with those problems that are brought home. Is there federal or state grant money also available for this sort of work, or is that diminished in today's environment?
The federal grant funding is paused for now, but I am an English professor on the side, so I set my alarm every morning at 4 a.m. I'm also our grant writer, and I'm putting in 2 right now that are larger grants asking for continued funding, but it's actually, you mentioned the children of veterans. We're starting a new program, and it's literacy intervention. Because I'm on a school board, we actually have 23,000 students in our school district, and the children are only reading at 38% proficiency across grade level. And many of these are veteran and military children who've moved around a lot and who have issues with either English as a second language or literacy in general, just from moving and not having constant educational care. And so we've started a literacy program, and it's in a national called Horse-Powered Reading, but we have started it at our center, and it's 2 retired school teachers, one's a principal, and it's to reach out to the military and veteran children and be able to do literacy intervention prior to 3rd grade and then 3rd grade to 8th grade to help reduce that gap. And then secondary, we also, we accept Medicaid, but that barely covers 1/3 of the cost for children that need intervention for behavior and mental health that are in middle school. We're seeing a high rate of suicidal ideation in middle schoolers. And so what we're able to do is bring them out and do some group work. But again, the cost is prohibitive for a lot of families that actually need it. It's a catch-22. So we look for funders to help us keep those programs going for the children that are here and then our military families that rotate through.
So we normally start our veteran radio programs talking about our guest's military career, so that our listeners know that this person maybe has walked in their boots before. We didn't do that here because I wanted to get right into equine therapy and the current need at StableStrides. I'm hoping some folks will reach out and help support. But Michelle, let's back up. I think we mentioned you went through the Air Force Academy. You became a pilot. You flew overseas. Tell us a little bit about that. Then we also touched on you were in the White House. Well, you were a White House fellow, and again, recently retired back to Colorado with your husband and family. Your husband, a former Air Force pilot as well. But tell us a little bit. Let our listeners know that you're the real deal.
Well, I graduated from the Air Force Academy in 2003, and then I went on to fly the C-130 and then the MC-12, which is a King Air 350 that does manned intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. So I did my tours in Afghanistan, and we would fly over continuous operations so that we could watch the ground and we could send down real-time surveillance to the ground troops so they could make battle decisions. And we could also do battle damage assessment. But while I was there, I got very close to the Afghan people. I also taught English. So in addition to being a pilot, I was an English professor at the Air Force Academy. So I did a lot of volunteer teaching for the young girls in Afghanistan, teaching English, and some young men that were there. So I also had interpreters. And when it came time to come back to the US, I was a White House fellow under both President Trump and President Biden. And I did speech writing, military advising. And like I said, I was there the night of the Afghanistan fall. And then I went on to the Pentagon. I did future warfare in the Joint Staff. My final assignment was the Air Force sent me back to work at NORAD in Cheyenne Mountain. So I was the Deputy Command Center Director, watching all of the missiles around the world. And now I still work with the Air Force Academy as an admissions liaison officer. And I'm also one of the theater officers in charge. So we're doing Fiddler on the Roof. But I bring all that up to say I went back and forth between flying airplanes and also teaching. So I really had the left and right brain going because I taught English. And what I noticed a common thread through both flying and doing operations overseas and then teaching was really the humanity, that part of it. We can get more and more advanced in technology and AI and our combat systems, but at the heart of it, it's really the people that we need to take care of that are still making the original decisions. And I was noticing a heavier and heavier load on a lot of our young guys who did 11, 12 deployments. So I went and decided to get a master's degree also in psychology and become a life coach. And the reason I did that is because as much as we've worked to reduce the stigma in mental health in the flying community, in the last 3 years, I have lost people that are very near and dear to my heart to suicide because they could not come forward. In the flying community, if we come forward, you will still have the possibility of losing your wings, which to many people is their livelihood. And it's not just the flying community, a lot of special operations. So we're working on getting that to be much more open and reduce the stigma. But the point is, a lot of people won't go through TRICARE, won't go to the VA, but they will go to a private life coach. And if they go to the private life coach like me, I work in the grief and I work in all of these areas to be able to give them an avenue. And I'm not saying go around the military system. I'm saying I'd love for it to augment. I would love for our people to be able to go to their healthcare provider, but also see someone like me who's a life coach that can walk you through a lot of the same challenges that you would talk to with a therapist. So I've joined with a group out here that does retreats for veterans. And we bring people out here who are facing some of the toughest situations you can imagine, suicide and grief and loss, and we bring them out to do a retreat with equine therapy. So that's in addition to StableStrides. We do that for anyone in the entire country listening. You can reach me through StableStrides.org, and we can talk about those veteran retreats.
Well, and one of the things we try to get when we're promoting nonprofits and supporting nonprofits like StableStrides is we want our listeners to know, as I mentioned a minute ago, the person organizing it, running it, the person who's going to be a fiduciary of the funds that you donate, has the heart and their brain in the right spot. And clearly, Michelle, you do. We've been longtime friends, so I know better than most, and your family. So I know everything's in the right spot. So we're glad to bring StableStrides.org to the forefront. to highlight the value of equine therapy, but also the struggles in today's climate to financially be able to keep something like this going. And we'd encourage folks to go check it out a little bit more, and if you feel compelled to support the cause. So, Michelle, really appreciate the time that you've given us today on Veterans Radio.
Thank you.
And I want to thank everybody for listening to Veterans Radio today. I am Jim Fausone. It's been a pleasure to be your host. I'm a veterans disability lawyer at Legal Help for Veterans, and you can reach us at 800-693-4800 or legalhelpforveterans.com on the web. You can follow Veterans Radio on Facebook and listen to its podcasts and internet radio shows by visiting us at veteransradio.org. That's veteransradio.org. We again want to thank our national sponsors, the National Veterans Business Development Council, nvbdc.org, Legal Help for Veterans, a veterans disability law firm with a national practice before the VA, can help you on your claims and your appeals. It can be reached at legalhelpforveterans.com or 1-800-693-4800. We also want to thank our local sponsors. This would include the Charles S. Kettles chapter of the Vietnam Veterans of America, that's chapter 310, VFW Graf O'Hara Post 423, the American Legion Irwin Preskin Post 46 in Ann Arbor as well, the VA Ann Arbor Healthcare System, and certainly the National Vietnam Veterans of America Association. You can be a sponsor by going to veteransradio.org, clicking on the About Us and our sponsors, and help us out. Keep this program alive for the 21 and 22 years. Keep us going for another 20. Thank you.